Hello and welcome to Formulas for Frames. My name's Jenny Baker, and this has been my passion and my dedication for a number of years now, and I'm excited to present it to people in the hope and the expectation that it can be used to teach students about written expression at sentence level and to inform teachers and speech pathologists of a process that they can go through to really make those parts of the sentence very explicit to students and very accessible to them. I want people to use or to view this webinar first before the second one, which is actually about how to teach the program. This one is dedicated to the language devices that are going to be targeted in the sentences of the scripts. So essentially we've got 8 stories. Each one has 18 frames, 18 pictures, wordless pictures. And for each of those 18 pictures, there's 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 sentences, and in each of those sentences there's phrases and words that have been deliberately embedded in them to provide teachers with the opportunity to teach students about how those language devices work in sentences. So it's all about the jobs that the language devices do. And what we know about narratives, which is the basis for formulas for frames, is that in narratives, the most important aspect is the verb, and we look after that. That gets expanded and upgraded and embellished by a whole range of other language devices like adverbs. And then there's nouns, because of course there's descriptions of settings and objects and characters. So they need embellishment too and upgrading through similes and adjectives and appositives and a whole range of other language devices. So it's really exciting to start to look at language in this way, to start to look at how grammar, how form can provide us with function, how grammar can do really effective things within the narrative. And if we go from this point of teaching where it matters for particular grammatical devices to be embedded in sentences because they do great things, it's much easier for children to digest why we need good quality vocabulary or adverbs of manner, place and time, etc. So that sort of sets the grammatical context for it. I'm now going to share my screen and put myself up in the corner. Okay, so let's have a look. The Formulas for Frames is a methodology for teaching students the how and the why of employing specific grammatical language or grammatical devices within a narrative genre. And there are a lot of language devices. And how I did it was that I wrote the scripts with about a year 4, 5, 6 student in mind. And then I analysed the scripts, but then I looked for potential within them so that if there was a fairly ordinary verb in one sentence, I would upgrade it to a more specific verb, or I might embellish it with an adverb of manner. So if it was run, or ran, the dog ran to find its owner, I might think, well, let's upgrade that to raced, or let's embellish that with an adverb of manner and write ran quickly. So the accumulation of the 30 language devices began at around 20, and they were very logical ones, but the additional ones came as the scripts became more complex and more interesting and more advanced. And as such, there was opportunity to teach a whole range of language devices. Now, having said that, you are under no obligation to teach all these language devices. If you've got a year 3 class and you think teaching things like appositives or similes or idioms is too complex, then don't do it. Just give them the words in the sentence. Just tell them what to write, but teach them the other aspects, so adverbs of time and place and post-modifying adjectives, etc. So you can choose what you teach and you can choose what you don't teach, which is the beautiful thing. It is designed to be a flexible program. So here we go with the language devices for narrative texts grouped according to function. And the belief is that, yes, you do have to extract the skill from the game. So you do have to take out something like similes and teach them specifically and explicitly to students, and then put it back into the narrative. So the narrative is just a vehicle. The script is a vehicle to teach these language devices at sentence level. And I've done it. I've done it over and over and over again at Mosman Park Primary School. So I know the traps and I know the advantages of using a pre-prescribed script where I know all the different language devices that I need to teach. So as soon as the language device has been taught, you put it back into the narrative, and then the scripts are designed so that that particular narrative device will come up again and maybe one more time. So there's opportunity for revision and review. And I often get asked by teachers, how do I teach students to write a good sentence? And I think that that's been lost in the genre approach to teaching writing, because we're very focused on the superstructure of the narrative and not so much on the within sentence structure. So I've written here, to teach written expression at the sentence level, we must have good recipes for sentence. We've got to know what a good sentence looks like, sounds like, and what jobs are being done inside it. And in order to construct effective sentences, we must select the very best ingredients for them. And that's what I'm going to teach now, the ingredients. And understanding grammar allows us to choose those ingredients. So it really is grammar. When we're talking about language devices, we're talking about grammar. We're talking about those grammatical devices that are used to do things like create imagery or connect ideas or orient the reader or create cohesion. So it's going back to grammar, but looking at it in a functional way. And that's what I'm really excited about. I'm excited to teach students that grammar can have really outstanding benefits and outcomes in stories. So I'm just going to go through quickly and just show you exactly what I'm going to be teaching you today, or in this webinar. And then I'm going to go back and unpack all of these. So we're going to look at dynamic action. That's the first job that gets done. We know in narratives it's filled with dynamic action. Things happen. So we're going to look at upgraded verbs and adverbs of manner. The other thing that we're going to look at in terms of verb usage is more reflective and planning verbs. So those mental verbs that illustrate cognition, emotion, and sensory behaviours. The next job we have to do for readers, we've got to orient them. We've got to tell them when things happen with adverbs of time and where things happen with adverbs of place. We need to be very specific. So we do that by using proper nouns or upgraded nouns, appositives, adverbs of degree and adverbs of frequency. Now for imagery, for setting or character or object, adjectives, pre and post, similes or metaphors, idioms, personification and onomatopoeia. Those 5 language devices create imagery. Number 6 is connectivity. We need sentences or parts of sentences to relate to one another. So this has to relate to this using a word in here, which is a connector of reason or consequence or adversity or time or condition or addition. The next one is emphasis. When we read a story or a piece of text, we use our voice, we use pitch and length and volume to provide emphasis. So when we write, we want to do that as well. And we do that through repetition, rule of threes, alliteration, and rhetorical questions. And cohesion, the last job that we do inside stories. We create cohesion or a connectiveness of ideas through cohesive devices, and we'll look at those, correct pronouns, and sometimes theme-related words. So we're going to dive in now to dynamic action, okay? And as I said before, this is the most important thing. So we're going to look at upgrading the verbs, and that's a word that I've borrowed from students. Another word that they've used, although they don't use it so much anymore, is pimping. When there was a show called Pimp My Ride on the television, when I talk about, upgrading the verbs, the kids would say, oh, that's just like when you pimp your car, you pimp your verbs. But I'm not sure it's politically correct to teach kids to say that. So we'll stay with upgrading. So the belief is that every verb gives you the opportunity to upgrade it, and every noun gives you the opportunity to describe it. And I use those sorts of terms with kids all the time so that they are conscious of the fact that when they write a verb, if they write ran, I'll say, can you upgrade it with a better word than ran, or maybe with an adverb of manner that will tell you how that person ran. And if it's a noun, so if it's something like the beach, let's see if we can describe that beach through adjectives or through personification devices or a simile or a metaphor, something that will describe it. So verbs are the heroes of the sentence, and I use that word a lot with students, the word heroes, often talking to them about what is the hero word of their sentence. Why did they like that word? Is there a word that they could now look at in the sentence and make it into a hero word now that they've written the sentence? So there's 2 types of verbs. There's the active verbs, and then there's a sort of static verbs. So again, active verbs, you can see they're dynamic, they're external, and that's another word that we've used for them, particularly in the younger grades, external verbs. So, waving, jumping, anything that you can see is an external or active or dynamic verb. Those verbs that you can't see, I often stand in front of the class and say, oh, I'm verbing inside my head now. I think I left the iron on before I left home today, so I'm worrying about that. Can you see me worrying? And I stand there stony faced and very still in front of them, and they say no. So I'll say that's an internal or mental or static verb. So it's really important, and I get the children to draw a person, and we write internal verbs inside them, like love, hate, sort of at the heart level, see, hear, and then the thinking verbs, remember, plan, decide, all those sorts of verbs. And then on the outside, run, kick, jump, wave, all of those. So, yep, active verbs you can see. So let's have a look at why it's important I'll just shift myself up here, why it's important to upgrade verbs. Well, again, a word I use a lot with kids is the vibe. Like, what vibe do you want to the reader to get from your story, or even your sentence, or the action that you're writing about. So if you write, the old man went to the bus stop, the verb there is went. It's a dynamic verb, but it gives no indication of how or why. If you said walked, it's a slight improvement. But if you wrote hobbled or marched or sprinted, it gives off very different connotations. I talk about them being juicy verbs. You've got lots and lots of different layers and complexities of those verbs. So, of course, if he hobbled to the bus stop, it gives you a sense that something was wrong, maybe, and he normally takes the car, and this time he's got to kind of walk with a bit of a limp. Marched, maybe in an authoritative way, or sprinted, which is unusual for an old man, but it would give you some parameters to think about, some characteristics of that person. So I use this to show children how just changing up the verb can make the sentence much richer and more juicy. So in here, oops, I'm just going back there. In here, we know that there's a tiered system of vocabulary, and it's usually considered as a 3-tiered system, with one being very basic, kind of one syllable, ubiquitous kinds of verbs that can be used for a whole range of things like got, had, ran, found, went, said. Then up another level would be probably raced, dashed and sprinted. So they would probably be level 2. And level 3 is very, very topic specific. So in order to make the actual tiered system more functional to teach writing, I've just suggested that, we look at increasing the specificity and the complexity of the verbs as they move from 1 up to 4 or 3, doesn't really matter. And I've just done ran, raced, dashed, sprinted. In my mind, they get more and more specific and a bit more dynamic, from ran to raced, from raced to dashed, from dashed to sprinted. But there's no rhyme nor reason. I mean, yes, there is a reason, because they're getting less commonly used words as the tiers increase. But it's just useful to say, can you move that up another tier? Can you go up another step in that triangle to see if you can get a better quality verb? In Vocabulary Ninja, this is a handout that you can get free, and it is 100 common words. They're not all verbs. Some are adjectives like unhappy, and some are adverbs of frequency or degree. But then if you've got here, you've got walk and went. So you'd have a look at those. So walk, stroll, saunter, amble, plod, wander, roam. Went, moved, proceeded, progressed, journeyed, departed, travelled. And I always teach the verbs in past tense. So even though these are not, I would certainly always teach them in past tense, because that's kind of one of the mandates that we ensure children, at least at the early stages of writing, understand that the script has to be written in a past tense form. So as well as increasing the complexity or upgrading the verb, the other thing to do is to use adverbs of manner. How? He probably says who rather than how, but that's okay. He's going to represent how. So if we wrote something like, she walked how slowly and spoke how quietly. Those ly adverbs of manner do a great job in explaining the way in which the action was done. So you can have ran, and if you said she ran speedily or steadily towards the goal, you know that those words, those ly words, are addressing the verb. So it's almost as good as upgrading. And I say to kids, you can still use a tier 1 verb, but dress it up with a adverb of manner. So here are some pretty ordinary verbs: asked, showed, found, saw, went, said, got, walked, watched, and see how I put them all in past tense. And then just a range of adverbs of manner that tell you how that action was taken. And sometimes that's more effective than actually using an upgraded verb. So the next types of verbs are those static verbs. They're internal verbs. They're the worrying, inside your head. So they code cognition, emotion, and sensory behaviour. And in the scripts, there are lots and lots and lots of cognitive verbs. These are just some other words for them. And remember, I talked to you about using the term internal because they happen inside. And this is what they code. They code sensation or sensory behaviour, thinking or cognition, and emotion. So what do they do in stories? And we know from good quality stories that, yes, dynamic action is really important. It's important to have, events happening one after the other. It's exciting to go through and map the actions of the characters. But we also know from good quality stories that there's moments where the action stops and there's reflection on past events and planning for future ones. And these internal or mental verbs often demand much more complex linguistic constructions after them. She remembered that she had last seen her purse at school in the office. So you've actually got quite a lot. After remembered, you've got the opportunity to use a lot of other words after it. So we know from research that mental verbs provide us with an opportunity to construct very complex linguistic features after them. So let's have a look at a story about a little dog that steals a bone from a butcher. And there he is. So we'll have lots of dynamic action. And then we'll have some reflection and planning, and then back onto the dynamic action. So maybe he grabbed the bone and he raced out of the butcher's shop, and the butcher raced after him, and the dog jumped over the stream, and the butcher, jumped over the same stream, and then the little dog skidded around the corner, and the butcher waited for him in the hope that he would catch him. And then you can stop the dynamic action, and then you could say the little dog realized that the butcher would eventually catch him. So you're reflecting. He wondered what he should do to outsmart the butcher. So he decided to wait behind the shed until the butcher had gone home for the night. So now you've got, he realised, so now they've got some reflection, and then wondered and decided are planning. And now, then you can go back in, after he waited for an hour, he headed off at great speed and fled home with the bone still in his mouth. So you break up the dynamic action with reflection and planning through those mental verbs. And here are mental verbs that are categorized according to function. So I'll just go from right to left. So I'll move myself again. So on that right side are the sensory verbs like witnessed, saw, heard, smelled. Here are the emotional ones: hoped, loved, hated, despised. And these four columns by far contain the biggest group of mental verbs, which are verbs of cognition. So things that you think, that you remember, that you plan, that you deduct. So all of those are cognitive mental verbs. The next category is orientation, and you have to orient your reader in terms of when things happen and where things happen. And one of the lessons that I give students very early up is time phrases and place phrases, which are adverbs of time and adverbs of place. And I talk to them about when they watch a video, they see day turning into night and the camera pans over the beach, and then the next scene, the children are running along a jetty, and then at night time they're heading out to the rocks to go fishing. So you get a sense of the temporal, so the time related events through the setting and the place. It occurs naturally. But one of the things that students need to know is that you have to do this with words for a reader. So you have to orient your reader in time and place, often in the story. So time phrases would be, when it was dark, after lunch, late last year, one sunny day. And it's important to, I suggest to students to start nearly every paragraph with a time phrase, because it's probably the case that they're starting a new paragraph because a new kind of set of actions are occurring, and they are occurring at a new time in the story. You'll see here also that when the time phrase is at the beginning of a sentence, you need to put a comma after it, not so much at the end. So you might say they all went home when it was dark, and there's no comma in that sentence. But when it was dark, comma, they all went home. So those fronted adverbs need to have a comma after them. And this is William Van Cleve's idea about the plane and the cloud, which I think is fabulous. I probably didn't do it justice the time I taught it, but anyway, I gave it a crack. So anything that a plane can do in relation to a cloud is an adverb of place. And you'll see they start with prepositions. So you could have behind the cloud, up to the cloud, on the cloud, in a cloud, under the cloud, between two clouds, beneath the cloud. So all of these words that I just read out there, you could have as the relationship between the plane and the cloud. What I've done here is shown you that at the beginning of a sentence, if you're putting an adverb of place, it needs to have a comma after it, but not when it's in any other position in the sentence. So these, much more than adverbs of time, tend to occur most frequently at the beginning of sentences. Adverbs of place can occur at other situations, at other spots in the sentence, and so they're more flexible. But the beautiful thing about adverbs is that they are flexible. They can go anywhere in a sentence. They're really terrific like that, and they embellish the verb. So adverbs are the sort of the foot soldiers of the verb. They give the verb a sense of context, where it happened and when it happened. So that's why I was saying the verbs are important and they have support systems in place. Now for specificity. So we're going to look at these 5 language devices that really make the author of a text seem to have a degree of authenticity about what they're writing about. So when you're using things like proper nouns or upgraded nouns, it looks like you know a lot about the subject that you're writing about, and that's important. So proper nouns, they increase the specificity and the authenticity of information. So if I said the pilots flew over the bridge but couldn't locate the missing swimmer, versus the pilots flew over the Sydney Harbour Bridge but couldn't locate the missing swimmer, immediately it draws you to a location that you know and that you can relate to, and that increases the specificity of information. If you look here, I've just written the first sentence. The principal of an inner city school has expressed concerns that a phone tower is being constructed on a nearby road. Now, if we swap out all those common nouns and put in proper nouns, we'd get Mrs. Veronica Hamilton, principal of Sutherland Secondary School, has expressed concern that a Telstra phone tower is being constructed on Tweeddale Road. So those increases in specificity are brought about by proper nouns, and they don't have to be true. You can just encourage students to make up names. And there's a website here, Thoughtful Learning, replacing general nouns with specific nouns. So again, in the texts, I looked at every opportunity that I could to upgrade nouns. And it was so interesting. I wrote the scripts, and then I rewrote them, and then I edited them first and second time and a third time, and even by the fourth time I was still finding opportunities. So in the story about the girls that are in canoes and they're travelling down the Avon River, and the one girl gets tipped out, and I said the other girl ran along the shore, the shore of the river, and then I thought, it'd be much better to use the bank of the river. It's a much more interesting word. So even though it's a shorter word, it's probably a simpler word in many respects, it's a more specific word. So I upgraded shore to bank. I upgraded in the Lion on the Loose story, cage to enclosure. And when I've talked about in the instructions for the program, when I've talked about downgrading nouns and verbs, if you're working with children with, quite significant language difficulties, or very young children, and, they can't even write the word enclosure because it's a hard word, use cage. And then orally say, let's think of some other words at cage, that you could use instead of cage. So these were some, these are from Robot Goes to School. I said he didn't know the way to school. He didn't know the direction to go to school. He made a big noise. I changed it to commotion. He knew his final place. He knew his final destination. So it was such an interesting exercise to do, to look at opportunities to upgrade. And again, the beautiful thing about having a script to do that is that you have control of the words that you're going to teach, which makes it so much easier to be prepared for every teaching moment within the sentences. Positives. And a positive is just a phrase that describes a noun, that follows the noun, and it provides more information about the noun, and it is defined, it has commas as its boundaries. So in the Robot Goes to School, I wrote Mrs. Turner, the principal of Port City Primary School, raced after the wild robot. So the principal of Port City Primary School is the appositive there. It is a phrase that describes the noun, Mrs. Turner. The Fremantle Dockers, Western Australia's best football team. I might change that to Australia's best football team in a few weeks' time when we win the 2022 grand final. But again, the Fremantle Dockers is the noun and Western Australia's best football team is the appositive. Adverbs of degree provide information about how much or to what extent an action is taking place. So they include words like almost, nearly, entirely, virtually. They give a sense of how much or to what extent that verb of finished, died, covered, or gone has taken place. And they indicate the degree of intensity of an adjective as well, not just a verb. So not just quiet, he was so quiet. How sick was he? Really sick. How hard was it? Very hard. How sore was his leg? Incredibly sore. So again, you can see that upgrading of specificity and intensity. And adverbs of frequency tell us how often something takes place or the intensity of an occurrence or an event. And this is a fun checklist, and I'm not in, there's no way that I think this is research based, but it's kind of cool because it gives you a sense of the types of adverbs of frequency that you can have. Hardly, never, hardly ever, rarely, seldom, occasionally, sometimes, often, frequently, usually, always. Those sorts of things that you see often heading up the polls that we sometimes are asked to fill in. But certainly those are really important verbs because adverbs, because they give verbs a sense of how often they've occurred. So now it's imagery. And again, we get imagery from a whole range of different devices. Adjectives, similes and metaphors, idioms, personification and onomatopoeia. So adjectives, and these are great. And so here we've got a dog or a pup. So we can have adjectives that come before. We can have strings of adjectives. A black, short-haired dog. These are called pre-modifying because they come in front of the dog. The ones that come after the dog are post-modifying with floppy ears. That has a stumpy tail, wagging his tail. And sometimes you can use both. The big black dog wagging his tail is the best one I've ever seen. The short-haired dog with floppy ears is bound to win the champion dog competition. And here are some other sentences here. So when you've got dog, dog is the noun. So now we're dressing up the noun with pre- and post-modifying phrases or clauses. Clauses have a verb in them, phrases don't. And again, there are loads of these in the scripts. Because they are good linguistic devices to learn about, and they offer additional information about how something looks or what it does. And in those post-modifying ones, we've got the dog that, the dog which, the dog with, the dog verbing, the dog wagging its tail, the dog panting. And then for people, we use who, the man who. And so lots and lots and lots of great verbs in front of nouns. And we also, this is a tricky one, lots of people don't realise that when we've got a linking verb like seems or is or was or appears or were, that's a linking verb. So that dog seems friendly. Friendly is the adjective. It's a friendly dog. It seems friendly. The sky is black. Black is the adjective. The essay was difficult. Difficult is the adjective in that sentence. So these are sometimes missed as adjectives because we're so used to seeing them before a noun, like the black sky, or even slightly after the noun, the sky that was black, but not at the very end of the sentence, the sky is black. So it's just important to recognize that those are also adjectives. And here are some adjectives of appearance and personality and feelings and shape, size, time, quantity, sound, taste, touch, colour and qualities. And it's a good idea to have charts up with those headings, so appearance, qualities, colour, so that students know that they are the types of adjectives, they're the categories that they can choose from. This I got this from Twitter, I think, and I think it's still available, that link, where some person found this great idea, or discovered this great idea of actually looking at intensities or strengths of adjectives. So from tense to concerned to anxious to worried to distraught, they are intensities, different intensities of the worried adjective, or sad or happy. And we all know that kids use those very basic tier 1 adjectives like sad and happy and big and small, cold and wet. So now it's we can get them to increase the specificity and the complexity of their adjectives by telling them to get to either upgrade or something. Find me a word that's more sad than sad. That's really sad. We can use personification in stories. That's a tremendous device that allows us to turn inanimate objects into animate objects. So one of the best ways to teach it is to actually teach it with some sort of disaster, like a bushfire, or a storm, or a volcano, because they've kind of got animate qualities. They're angry and they roar and dance and hide and wave, all those sorts of verbs. So if the verb is an animate verb, so played, hid, smiled and waved, they're things that people do or animals do. If we apply those to inanimate objects, we are creating personification. And so it brings about, so if we said the bushfire roared, we know that that's something that you would associate with a lion. So a lion would roar. So that gives that bushfire almost a sense of a predator, of an angry, dangerous animal, because it's got that one word in it that's roared, and that's what we would associate with a lion. So they're really efficient and effective imagery makers. The other way to get personification is from the adjective. So we can have an angry sea, or a graceful tree, or a fierce fire, or a happy moon. And again, angry, graceful, fierce, happy, disapproving, violent are words that we would use most often with humans, or sometimes with animals. And then again, when we associate them with objects, those objects come alive and they get sort of a momentum about them that is associated with the same person or living thing that represents that adjective or noun or verb. Teaching similes and metaphors, again, stayed faithful to the Dockers, and this year they've proven themselves to be a very top team. So if I was writing a story about the Dockers and I wanted to say that they were incredibly strong and fast and brave on the field and took up every opportunity and never gave up, I could write all of that, or I could write the Dockers played like warriors on Saturday. Because what do we know about warriors? This is what we know. They're brave, they're bold, they're strong, courageous, committed, fast, combative, confrontational, feisty, threatening, and attacking. So if I wanted to encapsulate all those features that I know about warriors and associate them with the Dockers, all I do is use a simile. So I'd say the Dockers played like warriors, using like, or I could use the Dockers were as brave as warriors on Saturday. Or if I use a metaphor, I just say the Dockers were warriors on Saturday. So I'm just putting the two together as if one was the other. Those children are animals. Those Dockers were warriors. So idioms, they came up a couple of times, not often, and they are interesting. They are sentences or phrases where you cannot interpret what they mean from just a literal, superficial processing of the words. So they often come from historical contexts. So something like, I feel under the weather. I read that came from traveling on the high seas. When people were seasick, they went under the boat to get away from the harsh weather. So they felt under the weather. And so I'm sure most of these have got stories. I haven't investigated them all, but they're very culturally specific. And again, they are, highly figurative and provide a lovely kind of atmosphere and mood around a sentence where you have that joint understanding of an idiom that creates a vibe or an atmosphere or an image to the reader. An onomatopoeia is a great word, and kids love it, and we clap it out, onomatopoeia, and then we look at, do a little bit of spelling and look to see what's, what sort of morphology this is inside this word. But it's basically words that sound like the action that they represent. So, boom, bang, whir, sizzle, sound like the action that they represent. So we're heading into connectivity. And what you need to know about connection within sentences is that in any sentence, or to move from a simple sentence, like A, where you might have, it was raining outside, you can just have the simple sentence, it was raining outside, and then you can join something else onto that sentence, because there was a cold front coming through, but we were still allowed to play in the rain, and it started to hail as well. So you've got the key component, it was raining outside, which is A, and then you've got part B, and when you put them together, there is a relationship between them. This happened, and then that happened. This happened, so that happened. This happened because that happened. So there's relationships between those two parts of a sentence. And when we add connectors, it makes those sentences into compound or complex sentences. And we're always looking to make the written sentence more complex as the students get more advanced in their years of writing. So the relationship goes two ways. So when we think about reason, why something happened. Consequence, what will happen as a result. Adversity, something unexpected happened that we wouldn't have predicted. Time, something happened in time relationship. Condition, under what conditions something will happen. And addition, what happened in addition to the first event. So let's have a look at the chart. So there's that initial stem. It was raining outside. And then if you want to use reason, you can use a word like because. And then you put the reason here. So part A is what was happening. It was raining outside. And part B is the reason. So you can join that with because. And then in the next slide, you'll see that not only can you use because, but you can use since or as or to or due to the fact that. You can't use them all interchangeably. Some sentences will prefer one over another. But yeah, they're all synonyms for because. It was raining outside, so now we need for a consequence. What was the consequence? Well, we had to eat our lunch in the classroom, and this word so is this tiny little word that tells us the relationship between it was raining outside and we had to eat our lunch in the classroom. This is what we did because of this. This happened, so this happened. Adversity, again, it was raining outside and something happened that we didn't expect. We were still allowed to play. So let's have a look at some other words for but. However, although, yet, nonetheless. And there were some words for so, therefore, consequently, hence, thus. So you can see that there's some simple words that probably come into children's vocabulary fairly early on. But then if you want to improve their complexity of sentences, you ask them to use more complex synonyms for those relationships between sentence parts. It was raining outside when, so we're looking at a time relationship, during assembly last Friday. Addition, and it also started to hail. Now the condition is it will only rain outside. Condition if the cold front continues to move in our direction. So and they are basically, there are a couple more, but they're the most common types of connectors. And again, in all the scripts, all those connectors are apparent. Probably the ones that are used most are reason, consequence, adversity, and time, maybe. Quite a lot of them. And what we know is that young kids use and. They use and, it was raining outside and we had to eat our lunch in the classroom. So they will use and instead of the more specific consequence words like so, therefore. And I'll tell you now that the time connectors are, the connectors of time take up the biggest number of synonyms of all the different connecting areas or ranges. Emphasis. Again, like I said before, if we can't say something louder or hold it longer or raise our pitch, we have to do it in writing. And so we have to, if we want readers to attend to a part of that sentence, we do things like repeat, provide a rule of three, use alliteration or a rhetorical question. So writers use repetition to give words rhythm. It adds a sort of a musicality to a piece of text and draws attention to sometimes minor detail. And the impact is high attention or emphasis. These are emphatic devices. In a land far, far away. Help me, help me, help me, Tom screamed. And again, I've deliberately embedded multiple examples of repetition in the texts so that children learn how to use them. Not too much, but now and again, sparingly used, they have a really powerful effect. Rule of threes. And I think that in one particular story, in Ferris Wheel Fire, there's a lot of rule of threes. And we know that, the technique of multiple of threes is used to create emphasis by taking advantage of the way the brains cling to patterns. Human process information through pattern recognition. So if we say things like they saved up $100 by doing jobs such as gardening, dog walking, and babysitting. They went on the Ferris wheel, the roller coaster, and the flying chairs. So there's that rule of three is sort of a comforting, almost an expectant type of strategy to use to create emphasis in a text. Alliteration, again, often kids know what it is. The seagull screeched or the cautious cat climbed carefully, but they don't know why they use it. And what I did with the year fours was I said to them, take your first name, so my name's Jenny, they take the first sound of Jenny, which is J, and then think of a shop that will sell something that starts with that same sound as your name. So mine was Jenny's Jumpers. And then I said, now put in an adjective that you want to describe the sort of thing that you're selling in your shop. So I chose Jenny's Jolly Jumpers, and I said mine were going to be bright, knitted, colourful jumpers. So that's how I taught them alliteration. And I said to them, go when you're in town, have a look, and if you can see things like, Bob's Burger Bar, then you'll understand that that's been used deliberately to make you pay attention to that particular shop. And rhetorical questions are used, and I've used a couple of those. For example, when the boy gets trapped inside J-Mart, I've said, how could he escape? I think on the Ferris wheel fire, what could they do now? And rhetorical questions are used to increase the tension and engage and create a dramatic effect for the reader. And again, they make us pay attention to that particular part of the sentence in that particular part of the story. And lastly, cohesion. So we have cohesive devices, pronouns, and theme-related words. So cohesive devices. So let's think we're going to be writing a story about a great white shark. And we can say it, but we also need other lexical cohesion. So lexical just means word, cohesion means sticking together. We need other types of words to describe that shark. So we can depart from just great white shark. And if we think about it, you could use the apex predator, the king of the ocean, the man-eater, the killing machine, the most feared fish in the sea. And an interesting sort of byproduct here is that often students with language difficulties, when they're reading a story about, let's say, the great white shark, and the next line it said something like the apex predator came closer and closer to the unsuspecting surfers. This killing machine knew no mercy. Every time a new subject comes up, so apex predator, killing machine, man-eating shark, children with language difficulties think that that is another different character. So it's really important to teach them about lexical cohesion because it's used a lot in good quality literature, but children don't understand that it's all related to the one character. And pronouns are important because they're used to avoid repeating a noun or a noun phrase in a monotonous fashion. So rather than the boy this, the boy that, the boy went, the boy got, the boy said, we can use he or we use his name, Tom. Pronouns help readers track essential sentence elements such as characters and objects, so we know we can track through the text to see where those sentences or those characters have been referred to before, and they connect one sentence to the next. So we know when there's ambiguous pronouns. So all of a sudden, if there were two boys in the story and the child then writes, he went for a long walk, and you don't know which one it was, you either got to read beforehand or keep reading. So it discombobulates the reader. So the pronouns have to be used in specific relation to the character that they're referring to. Otherwise, cohesion is broken. So the last thing is theme-related words, and this was not used so much, but I think it's really important to talk about it because with sophisticated texts, you will see that you get that extended metaphor, and I didn't use it in the scripts, but I think with older kids you could try it. So I've left it in there even though it wasn't used in the script analyses. So theme-related words create a sort of an extended metaphor, which is a literary device that figuratively compares and equates two things that are not alike. So they getting bullied and being in a war are not the same thing, but you can equate them together. So let's have a look and see how you can use words from war to write about being bullied. So maybe the verbs could be destroyed, aimed, captured, the adjectives hostile, punishing, heinous, the nouns clash, conflict, force. So you could provide students with those words and say, write me a paragraph about a young boy who's experiencing bullying at school, but use these war words. And this is what we got from a young student, not in the primary school, this was a high school student. The young boy was destroyed by the constant conflict he endured as a result of his difference. Nothing could eradicate his pain. The heinous bullying and hostile comments drilled into his mind like bullets through butter. So you've got lots of war words there. You've got destroyed, conflict, endured, difference, eradicate, pain, heinous, hostile, drilled, bullets. So you can see here how we've used all those terminologies from war to in fact relate to bullying in a very effective way. So that is a romp through language devices that you will expect to see in the scripts, and they are very clearly delineated in the analysis, so you will know which ones to expect and which ones you want to teach. I think it's really important, and I'm going to say it again, that we look at language or grammar in a functional way. What jobs does it do? And that's what I've really tried to capture, is what jobs do those different grammatical devices do, and how do they affect not just the sentence but the overall story in relation to the effect the reader gets from the story. So now have a rest and then start the second part of the webinar, which is really about how to employ the program and how to use it at tier 1 or tier 2 or even tier 3 level, whole class, small group or individual level, in successful teaching of sentence construction.